Ray Bradbury was born and spent his early years in Waukegan, Illinois, just 40 miles north of downtown Chicago. His family moved west to Los Angeles during the Great Depression, and Bradbury went on to become one of the 20th century's most celebrated writers, crafting such classics as The Martian Chronicles, The Illustrated Man, Fahrenheit 451, and hundreds of stories, screenplays, and television scripts. His career has taken him far from his idyllic youth in Waukegan, but not too far. Those formative years in the Midwest were forever captured in his most celebrated stories. So one of the things that's striking about Bradbury in interviews is this memory, and he actually claims to remember his birth. So
yeah, that's just the weirdest thing. I mean, he gives lectures in L.A. because he doesn't travel, and he'll tell this birth story. I remember the day I was born, and people start chuckling and laughing. He claims that he was a 10-month baby. He was 10 months in the womb, and because of that extra month of development time, he recalls the process of being born. At first, when he first told me this, I thought this is just odd. You know, he's eccentric. I was skeptical. But now, you know, all these years later, I'm pretty certain that he probably does. And not because he was in the womb for 10 months, but because he's a creative genius. And I think he's using a small percentile of brain matter that the rest of us aren't using. And why the hell not? He went through the experience. He called his mother when he was 27 and said, "Mom," maybe 29 years old, called and said, I think I remember being born. Did it happen all like this? Was this the way the room was? Was this where the window was? Is this the kind of light that was there? There were two nurses, the doctor, and he was describing details that were bizarre. And his mother said, "This is unbelievable. How do you know this?" And he said, "Because I remember." So along the way, I've come to believe this. Psychiatrist, he was on a Dick Cavett show in the 70s, and a psychiatrist said, "This is impossible." It was a French psychiatrist. "You cannot remember," you know. And he said, "You know, I was there, were you?" I do remember it. So I believe the guy. And in really interviewing him and spending so much time with him, his memory is unbelievable. He'll say, I was on Western Avenue in Hollywood for the opening of a film, and Norma Shear came out of a theater, and I'll say, roughly what time, what month or day was that? And he'll tell me the exact month, the exact year. I'll go do an IMDb on the premiere of this film, and he nails it to the day. Continually. Has an encyclopedic memory on his own life. It's unbelievable. And every time I've gone back to fact check his recollections, he's spot on. So he's using something upstairs that the rest of us haven't, most of us for that matter, I guess, haven't been able to tap.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is these encounters with Garbo, this carnival when he was a young man, all this stuff, it's almost life stranger than fiction, and I kind of wondered if you ever thought he was just embellishing and making things up.
You know, that's interesting. I mean, of course, when he's recalling things that go back into the early 1930s or late 1920s, when does false memory come into play? Also, the thing that I was always a little bit skeptical about was, this guy's got a great imagination. When is his memory sort of embellishing the details over 6, 7 decades? When is he starting to see things up here differently, as we all do? You know, and there were moments, particularly in my biography, where I did fact check his memories, and I found that details were off. And in the biography, I called those out, you know, and he's, particularly with this magician you're referring to named Mr. Electrico, this is really, he would say, the pivotal moment in his creative life, where he was 12 years old and he went to a carnival on the shoreline of Lake Michigan and encountered a stage magician named Mr. Electrico, who would strap himself into an electric chair, and an assistant would pull a lever and he'd charge himself with 50,000 volts of power, and Mr. Electrico's hair would rise and his teeth would chatter and his eyes would glow, and the assistant would unstrap him. Mr. Electrico would reach and pull out an Excalibur sword and go out to the audience and knight each of the children sitting in the front rows. And the electricity would course through him, through the sword, and the children would feel it, and their hair would rise on their arms and on their heads, and they'd get a static charge from him. And Bradbury, this was a very important moment to him. He went back the next day and encountered Mr. Electrico, and They walked to the shoreline of Lake Michigan and had this long conversation, and Mr. Electrico told him, "I've met you before. You were my dear friend in World War I when I was a soldier, and you died in my arms. Welcome back to the world, my friend." Bradbury thought, this is so odd, so odd. And Mr. Electrico was this profound experience, and 2 weeks later, after that encounter, Bradbury started writing and never stopped, and looks at Mr. Electrico in many ways as the catalyst for his creative life. And so I went and fact-checked a lot of this as I was working on my biography, and found that indeed there was a carnival there that day. Haven't been able to find a character named Mr. Electrico, but there was definitely a permit taken out for a carnival on the day he recalled, but other details were off. I think your question, getting around to it, I mean, I don't think it's sort of any intentional embellishment at times. I think he may fall victim to false memory on occasion. But again, that's something I've taken very seriously as his biography, is if there's a story that has a lot of importance in his life, I go out and try to research it and see if it holds up. That was really, really important to me.